Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chatham Select Board of August 30th, 2022. Let the record show that the meeting started promptly at 5:31. I'll read the note. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16th, 2022, signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, until March 31st, 2023. This joint meeting of the Chatham Select Board is being conducted via in-person and remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number 1-508-945-4410, conference ID 203-386-491#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. And on the first order of business, I'll do a roll call here of this board. Mr. Nicastro, are you here?
Present.
Ms. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Shell?
Present.
Mr. Metters?
Present.
And the chair is present as well. Thank you very much. First order of business, the second order of business, I should say, is acceptance of the minutes, approval of the minutes of August 2nd, 2022, and August 16th, 2022, which is a joint meeting with the Council on Aging Board of Directors. A motion to approve the minutes of August 2nd, please.
So moved.
Second.
Comments, edits, suggestions, Mr. Nicastro.
Mr. Chairman, on page 9, after the motion by Mr. Shell in the middle, I think after the vote is recorded, I think we should have a sentence that says the Select Board meeting adjourned at 6:35 p.m. Right? Because the board did adjourn, and then it was only the Housing Trust that continued. Is that correct, Shauna? Thank you. That's the edit.
Yeah, good, thank you. Seeing and hearing no others, a roll call. Mr. Nicastro, what say you?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. The minutes of August 16th, a motion, please.
So moved.
Edits, suggestions, comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Shell.
One, just a very technical editorial on page 3, the third paragraph, counting up 4 lines in the bottom. The English teacher in me says, however, should be but.
Okay.
Page 4, in the first full paragraph, the penultimate line.
I think you need to press your button, Mike, please.
Oh,
Yep.
forgive me. Sorry.
Yep.
Page 4, the first full paragraph, penultimate line, the need, it says the need for mental health. I think it should be the needs for mental health, and then it goes on in for confidential professional service.
Yep.
And finally, on page 5, roundabout where right in the middle of the page where it says it was noted that there is strong opposition. I think just before that, there were a couple of comments, and I know because I made one of them, to the effect that the proposal from the 2021 ATM for 1610 was a kind of a standard for what we would look for going forward. And I would propose language as follows. In reference to the 1610 proposal considered at the 2021 annual town meeting, the opinion was expressed that that proposal set the standard against which future proposals should be measured.
Good. You get that, Shauna? Okay, yeah, okay, thanks, Mr. Shell. Anything else? Okay, motion to approve, Mr. Nicastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Next item of business are public announcements and/or agenda item requests. I believe we have public announcements. Katie Donovan, first up.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Really excited to announce two new Team Chatham employees. First, not with us tonight, Jeff Thibodeau is our new principal planner, and he'll be at a future meeting for a more formal introduction. But here with me tonight is Gloria McPherson. Gloria is our new and first Housing and Sustainability Director for the town. Gloria comes to us most recently from the town of Barnstable, where she was the Planning and Economic Development Coordinator. And she's also served as town planner in Provincetown and Fairhaven, and as well as the planning director in Concord, New Hampshire. So I'd like to just formally introduce Gloria. Say a few words.
Sure. Hi. It's nice to meet all of you. I am very happy to be tackling the housing challenges that Chatham and really the whole Cape faces. And I have to say, I've received a very, very warm welcome to Team Chatham. So it's been a pleasure spending my first week here in the offices and starting my second week. So looking forward to working with all of you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Gloria.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks, Katie. Any other announcements? Any announcements by members of the Select Board? Any agenda item requests by the Select Board? Mr. Nacastro has his hand raised.
Mr. Chairman, had inquiry about the, and we've seen some discussion in the press about the authority of the Select Board of the town to regulate private wells in terms of conservation restrictions. And I speak as a Select Board member, but as most people know, because I've disclosed it multiple times, I have a private well, which I shut off a few weeks ago, or approximately. But I would like to, there was a question asked of us at our most recent meeting, and Mr. Shell and I opined informally based on our law school training, I think. I would like to get a clarification from town council on what the authority of the town is on that topic. So I'd like to formally request an opinion of town council on the authority of the town, specifically the water and sewer commissioners, to impose conservation restrictions on private wells.
Okay, Mr. Nacastro.
Irrigation systems that are powered by private wells. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Dean. Anybody else on the Select Board? Anybody in the public in the meeting room here? Anybody? Yes. Yes. Jamie.
Jamie Meehan, Linden Tree Lane. I'm the chair of the SRAC, Summer Residence Advisory Committee, and we had a working subcommittee who researched the water issues, and one of our members posed a question to Dr. Duncanson, and the question was basically the hookup of private wells and what effect that would have on the situation. And the specific question was, how does banning the use of private wells for irrigation help with Chatham's water issues? And I'm going to quote Dr. Duncanson's response, if I may. His response was, and I'm paraphrasing it to some extent, that the use of private wells would not have a material effect on water usage in the town of Chatham. So, based on his expert analysis, the Summer Residence Advisory Committee does not agree with banning private wells. Thank you.
Is there an agenda item request there, Jamie, or not?
No agenda item, I just wanted to comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Any agenda item requests? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we'll go on to our order of business here. We have a consent agenda this evening that's going to consider a fish weir permit renewal by Mr. Lucas, a request to increase cultural council memberships from 5 to 9, and a special one-day alcohol permit, Creative Arts Center on permits, I should say, Creative Arts Center, September 11th and October 16th. Mr. Nacastro has his, would you move the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I wish to remove item 3A, the fish weir permit renewals, from the consent calendar for separate consideration,
Okay,
which I'm doing as a courtesy to another member of the board.
thank you so much, and I appreciate that, and so you.
And I'll be recusing myself from that item.
Okay, so why don't we consider that item, recuse yourself, and we'll consider that item, and then move on to the rest of the consent agenda.
So, Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the fish weir permit renewals requested by Mr. Ted Lucas.
Second.
Presented.
And is there any discussion? This has been a request made for years, and it's a no-brainer, so.
Decades.
Okay, decades. So anyway, Mr. Meadows, what say you?
Aye.
Did we second that? I'm sorry.
I did.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
The chair says aye. Ms. Davis, please return. Congratulations, Ted. Good to see you. Okay, and then the movement of the other two items on the consent agenda this evening.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the consent agenda.
I second.
Okay, let's see. Mr. Meadows, what say you?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Thank you very much. On to our next item on the agenda, which is utility pole status. We have some invited guests here this evening to walk us through. We have Ellen Cummings, the Regional Director of Verizon, and we also have Ronit, who is returning from Eversource. But please come forward and give us an update here. There's a lot of interest. Welcome, Ellen. Make sure the green button's on, and,
It is on.
okay. Take it away. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, fellow Select Board members, Madam Town Manager. I appreciate the opportunity to come out here tonight to talk about the joint-owned utility poles in Chatham. We have a process in place. They are jointly owned. However, Verizon is responsible in the town of Chatham for the setting of new poles and the maintenance of the existing poles. As I stated, we do have a process in place. I know one of the concerns is the double poles that are in Chatham. I'd be happy to discuss the process of how we handle them and track them. We do use a database. I can do that if you'd like, and I'm also happy to answer any other questions, discuss anything you'd like.
Please.
So we use a database called Engines. We probably switched over to that database about 7 years ago now. The database we used prior, PLM, we felt that the data was outstanding, it wasn't correct. It was very difficult for utilities and other attachees to keep track in it or to even have access. So my Verizon and the electric companies decided to move over to what's called Engines. In order to make sure the data was correct, we hired a company, the utilities did, and we went out and we surveyed every single pole in the state of Massachusetts to make sure what was in the database for double poles was correct. So it's tracked via municipality when there is a double pole. For example, if there's a car accident, we would go and the pole needed to be changed out. We would go out, Verizon, and we would change the pole out. It's usually right beside the pole. At that time, Verizon would make a ticket and usually the next day enter the ticket into the Engines database. At that time, it would move to the next party that's on the pole that needs to transfer onto the new pole. And just so you know, which I'm sure you probably do, Power, Eversource, is always on the top, followed usually by, you may have some alarm, you may have a third-party cable, fiber, then you usually have cable TV. That may be a little reverse, but they're usually right above Verizon, and Verizon is always on the bottom. So Eversource always goes first, So Ronit goes first, and I go last on the pole. So when Eversource transfers onto the new pole, they go into the database under that double pole, which is tracked via a ticket, along with the pole number and whatnot that's in there, and they move it over to the next party on the pole, and they get notified, the person who is in charge of that, for that entity, say, hey, ball's in your court, time to go. All right. And in Chatham, where I'm the last to go, I will transfer, and at that time, I take the pole away. So that's how the process works. And double poles are tracked. There's also, we met recently, Ronit and myself, with the two chiefs, the town manager and the director of DPW, and we talked about the double pole list, and I said I was happy to give out a double pole list and send it to them once a month so they can actually see what's out there. So in a nutshell, that's the process that we use to track the double poles.
Yeah, Mr. Metters.
Just out of curiosity, what is an average timetable for the transition? Is it like a 3-month, 6-month, one? It's certainly not a week. I mean, but you got to go through the various steps, Eversource, your cable, et cetera. What is the typical period to transition one pole to another pole?
Well, I can't speak for the other utilities, but I know Verizon has, particularly over the past 5 years, put an extremely large amount of resources into clearing our backlog of double poles in the state of Massachusetts. We hired technicians to help us with that. That's all they did. So we are down to a minimal number of double poles. I think today I had 13 double poles total that were sitting in my court on the Cape. So we are measured internally on double poles, and we cannot have a double pole that's in our court sitting there for more than 30 days.
Okay.
Mr. DeCastro.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. The concern's been expressed by various citizens in town that there are some poles, single poles, that might be dangerous because of the way they're leaning or their condition. I know that in my own case, on my own property, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, Verizon came to replace a pole on their own initiative because the pole was pretty old. It wasn't leaning or anything. It went back to the 40s. They put a new pole, and they followed the process. It took a long while, but they did follow it. So do you have a schedule for tracking the condition of poles in the town of Chatham for potential replacement? I don't know how they happen to identify that particular pole as needing replacement.
Well, whenever, there are a few things. Whenever our technicians are out there, before they even touch a pole, or whether it's a maintenance situation or whether we're doing work, say, a road upgrade project, before we touch another pole, we have this safety protocol that our technicians have to follow. So there's that. One of the things that Verizon does is that in order to make sure that our facilities and our infrastructure maintains at a high level, you need to make sure that you have a proactive approach, right? So every 10 years, we will go into a municipality and survey every single pole that's in that town. So we did that. We started surveying in 2019. Things were a little sketchy. It had to stop because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, we went back to it in 2020 once everyone had the standards down of how you would proceed, outside during the pandemic. So we went and we looked at every single pole that Verizon has a set maintenance for in Chatham. We look at the pole, they test it. They make sure that pole, per the natural electric code, has to be at least 67% of its original integrity. If it falls at 67 or below, the pole is rejected. Then they take a look at the pole and they say, well, what is the damage on it? Okay. Sometimes immediately they say the pole needs to be replaced. And then there are some times that the pole is at 67 or just below, and they do some tests on it, or it may be some insect, damage to it. That's when you see the trusses go on the pole, which strengthens the pole. It also helps sometimes when there's a bend in it or things like that. So that would go on a list for replacement or for the trussing. And then the other poles may have, it's past. We also do we take a look at the pole, see if it needs some work for, like insect damage or water damage or something. You may see like sometimes it comes just above ground. There's a seal around the bottom of it. So that's what we do every 10 years on top of the regular work that we would do in town, which is, I have to say, is usually covered. The everyday work is covered a lot by everyone, not just our technicians, our foremen, our salespeople that may be out in a town. I know that before I came out, I had some information. I talked to the area operations manager and I said, I'll be out in Chatham, today. I'm going to take a ride around some of the places. And I noted a couple poles that were leaning that I was concerned about, that I'll get back to them. But were some poles that had lean in it, and you looked at it really carefully, and it has a guy wire. And some of them you really can't see where they go. They go into the trees and stuff like that. So those already have been, cared for with the guy wire. So there are different things we do. So I already have a list, but our folks do that. Our technicians may go by. That, I'm not sure when your pole was done. That may have been from that entire town inspection that we do. Also, we track, we see how old poles are and things like that. So someone may say, looking in a town, we have engineers that handle just the poles. Let's go put some eyes on this one.
Has the survey from 2019 been completed?
Yes. So we ended up replacing it in even 100 poles during that.
In the town of Chatham?
Yeah, for lack of better terms, condemned. We're not going to try to fix them.
Do you have a list at the present time of additional poles that need replacement or some sturdying up pending?
But at that time, we also trussed 447 poles. So right now, we have some jobs that are out there for Chatham that will need pole upgrades. We're always working with Eversource when they have work to do, since we have the set maintenance. Usually that calls for a taller pole, so that would be changed out too. So lists like that are very fluid, particularly right now when people are really trying to get work done before, the snow falls.
Is there a telephone number that people can call if they see a pole that they think is potentially dangerous?
So I have to say, I don't have a problem. People can always call repair. We do also have a dedicated municipal number for fire, police, I should probably step away from this a little, sorry. Fire, police, DPW, that's manned 24/7, that's only for them, that if they need, say if there's an accident or a line comes down across, Main Street or something like that, that they can call. Again, it's manned 24/7. But if somebody wants to, too, I have no problem with them sending me an email. I can make sure, I know the town manager has my email address. I can give you all a card before I leave. Someone emailing me and say, hey, I'm a little concerned about this pole that's on Acme Way, pole number 5/6, It is helpful if someone gives me a pole number, though.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Shell?
Two questions. First of all, thank you very much for coming in and for your report. Let me ask both questions. They're maybe a little bit related. One is, it's not clear to me what it is that occasioned a double pole in other words, how do we get a double pole in the first place? And then my second question is, in a prior session, I think at least I came away with the understanding that at some point in the past, Verizon and Eversource had kind of split up the municipalities in Massachusetts and taken ownership, I think was the word. Maybe that was metaphorical, but in any event, responsibility for poles in this town as opposed to Eversource in that town. In your opening remarks, you referred to it as being, the poles being jointly owned. Could you explain exactly what that is?
Sure. So we both own the poles. We have equal ownership in the poles. But when we jointly own the poles in any municipality, one of us will take the set and the maintenance. The set and the maintenance was decided way before we were, before we probably were born. But we don't change that. It stays, that's one thing that stays the same with Eversource. So what can a double pole come from? Well, it can come from an accident. It can come from a construction project, a road widening project where the poles are being moved. It can be caused by somebody else wants to attach to it. We have to keep certain distances between ourselves, and there's just no room. So we have to go to a taller pole. You see that a lot more now with folks wanting to put fiber, their own fiber on poles. Again, if there's equipment, sometimes if there's an upgrade, I know a little bit to make myself dangerous, Ranit. If there's an electric upgrade, they need to put more equipment or cabling on it. They may need some more room. We may put a new pole on it. Those are different things that can cause that. Along with just the pole needs to be replaced because it's.
And what I'm not clear, if it needs to be replaced, why not just replace it as opposed to put a pole, a second pole next to it?
Because everybody that's on that pole has to move their own facility, sir.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Anybody else on the select board? Any other comments? Corey? So Ellen, thank you for coming. I mean, you can certainly sense get a sense of the nature of the questioning, or that we're very interested in having safe telephone poles in the town of Chatham, having experienced one that kind of cracked, fell over, and had some damage. Though thankfully no one was injured. But so we want to get a sense and get comfortable that you guys are on your game in terms of knowing which poles are in danger, that are 67% or less, or whatever, 67% less than 67, in danger of being replaced, and you've got a discrete schedule that gets us to the point where we're replacing poles that are diseased or whatever with regularity, so that we don't ever have another pole that kind of decides on itself middle of the day to crack and fall over. So I just that's number one. And number two is my comment is there any conversations at Verizon of the future of underground utilities? Is anybody having any kind of a conversation about getting rid of poles long term?
I think, that would involve clearly more than just us.
No, I know, but I just.
I think I can speak for both of us. We would like to see nothing more than everything underground. I think everyone would. It would, particularly as we've seen an increase in storm activity and severity of activity on the Cape over the years. If the utilities were underground, that would make our lives a lot easier as well. It is a very difficult, tedious, expensive process, not just as for us, But for the municipalities, even for homeowners who go underground, depending on how far their structure is from the road. But, there are other places, I know when there's new construction, if it can be done, I know there's, when the mines meet, if it can be done, we do try to go underground. I know that probably the same for you. If you can go underground, you will go underground. So, yes, but it's not an easy process or easy answer.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
but just is there
No.
I'd love to hear that there's a task force looking at it, but it doesn't really sound as though there is.
Well, I mean, again, we're always looking at that underground option.
Yeah.
But I just don't, I wish I had more of an answer and a better answer for you. Even where I live, I would love to see underground, I'm sure you too, but that's about where we are right now with that.
And I don't mean to beat it to death, but is there, right now, if we went back to the office and asked yourself and your staff, what are the poles that need to be replaced in Chatham in the next month or 2 or 3 before the winter hits? Do you guys know that?
I mean, like I said, we have some jobs that are scheduled
Okay.
to be done. So yes, we know what needs to be done. But some of that is not always like we can start it tomorrow or something like that because of many different things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Anything else anywhere? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you, Ronit.
Mr. Chair, I
Yep.
have something else.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Ian, yeah, please.
Thank you both for coming. It's very helpful. I have a couple questions. The 13 poles that still need to be replaced, is that Chatham or is that Cape Cod, or is that local that you're speaking of? 13 double poles you mentioned.
Oh, there's none in Chatham.
They're just Cape Cod, or?
Yes, Cape Cod.
Oh, okay. Because in 2021, they had it was printed in a paper that there were 775 double poles in Massachusetts. And apparently, under Mass Law, Chapter 34B, utility companies are required to take down the existing utility poles within 90 days of installing a new one. Is there any chance, I think there are a lot of people in the public that want to be involved and want to help, and your idea of the phone, so we would then call a selectman, and then the selectman would email you?
No,
if
you
we
don't
identify-
Ellen.
have to necessarily do that. I mean, you can send me
Ellen,
any.
please come to the mic,
Oh,
because
I'm
it's
sorry.
important to be near the mic. Thank you.
And I knew that. I said to myself, I gotta move over if I gotta
Okay.
do
Your voice carries pretty well.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Doing great.
You can just email me. They will have my email address,
That
but,
is open for public consumption.
well, I mean, I assume that someone's not
You're
gonna
not
be
gonna get 100
saying that,
emails.
there's a little mark on the pole.
No,
You know what I'm
no,
saying? But,
no, I think it's
yeah, if
only-
someone's concerned about something,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They can email me, like I said, the street and the pole number makes it very easy for us, and we can respond more efficiently to it.
Okay. There was another question. The notification system that you have set up, I guess was in 1997, where you switched over to the newer system, nonprofit, it's NJUNS.
Engines, yes.
Engines. That is a nonprofit consortium of utility companies. And so the utility companies basically own it. Is that correct?
No, we do not own it. We pay for the service for all the municipalities, but we do not own it. We have to pay to use it.
That's interesting. Okay,
And just, it was not up and running in 1997.
that's interesting, well, because I just
We were
got.
not up and running in it, I should say. I should clear that up.
Because it's something
Yeah.
like 28 different
It was,
states are involved.
yes,
And so
use
probably
it.
they added on slowly, I'm
You
assuming.
know, so for us,
Okay.
there was a lot of work to be done and entered into it before we could
I'm
actually go
sure,
live.
I'm sure. Is there any chance that the database that you refer to, which is ever-changing, I understand that, is there any chance that the public, who your companies are serving, and we are paying for that service, would have any access to that? I understand, it sounds like you're going to allow town manager and DPW and select board in a town, in a municipality, to be involved
Well,
with this
we're
database.
always, whether I have the set maintenance or not, if we are requested by a town, one of the town officials or public safety, we'll gladly pull them a double pull report. We do not share that with the general public. And the general public, no, does not have access into the database.
Okay.
Okay, listen, I think, we'll move along here, Ann, thank you. I really appreciate, Ellen, your willingness to have correspondence come your way. That's really appreciated, and one hopes there isn't a deluge. I don't think there will be, but there'll be some concerned citizens that will reach out, I'm sure. Okay?
That's
All right, thank you very much for being here, Ronit, thanks for coming again.
Thank you for your time.
Nice
Came to
see you
support
folks.
Ellen, and we're in it together, so.
Yep, thank you very, very much. Thank you. Okay, our next item of business is an amendment, or any consideration of amendments to the water conservation measures and restrictions that are already in place. And I believe we have Tom Temple is going to tee it up here. Jill, is he online? Or
Yes, he's
Tom, you
on.
there?
Tom?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank
Good
you,
evening,
Mr.
Tom.
Chair, Select Board members. While I was away on vacation, they came out with a level 3 critical drought. Just to let you know, right now, currently, we're pumping between 7 and 12 hours a day, which is really good. People are taking the restrictions to heart, and we have seen a reduction in the amount of water being used on irrigation and otherwise. Just to give you an idea, we're normally around 3.1 million gallons per day during this peak time. And we've had 5 days in the month of August where we've been under 2 million gallons per day. So the restrictions are working and people are doing what they're supposed to. However, the EEA declared the Cape region a level 3 critical drought, and they're looking for a little bit more stringent methods where they want to stop all unnecessary essential watering and minimize water use altogether. So I don't know if it's something that the select board want to entertain, but talking with Dr. Bob earlier today, we were talking about one of the ways we could do that would be to eliminate the Monday, Wednesday, Friday hand watering to try to adhere to the EEA declaration.
Excuse me, Tom, but, so what's the formal recommendation from the state as to utilization, as to usage? I'm confused.
Their formal request, I think what they've indicated was to stop all non-essential outdoor watering, minimize overall water use, enforce water use restrictions with increased stringent penalties, strongly discourage and prohibit installation of new sod, seeding, landscaping, washing of hard surfaces, sidewalks, patios, etc., and establish and enhance water use reduction targets for all water users. So that's what they're looking for. We just so you know, we've been keeping track and continuing to monitor and send out letters. I believe this office last week sent out 92 or 93 letters for people utilizing water where they shouldn't be. So the water division personnel came in twice last week early morning just to go ahead and to ride around and take a look at people that might be watering that shouldn't be. So we're still monitoring this. We're still sending out the warning letters and in some cases fines. So we're doing the best we can to try to, curb this and make sure that everybody's following the same regulations.
Yeah, I understand. I guess my question is, and I'm still not clear, is what's the gap in what we're doing now versus what they want done? Where are we not abiding by the more strict regulations? Just a Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Yeah, I would think they want to stop any of the real hand watering now, is what they're looking to do, based on what I'm reading, which is hard. I mean, I know people are trying to just keep things alive on the plant side, but I think that's what they're essentially looking for.
So, and is this, do we have to abide by it? Is Pat, do we have Pat on the line?
Yeah, I think you're asking Tom too the question. So we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
Town Council Pat on the line, and
Yeah.
when we got the level 3 critical drought notification, we did raise a question to Pat about implementing it on private wells or properties that have private wells. But what I think that Tom and Dr. Bob are trying to do is look through where we are now, because we have quite enhanced water restrictions, and what's the gap between what's in a level 3 critical drought versus what the board had approved.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking, yeah. So who's going to answer it?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to say. The gap difference is to stop the hand watering Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that was allowed. I think that's what we're trying to do to adhere to their regulations, based on what we're reading.
I think that's going to be in my opinion, I think that's going to be a tough one. Plants will die. We've gotten through the worst of it, knock on wood. We've been as restrictive, I think, as we could possibly be within reason. So it's not one that I'm going to jump at, but I'm certainly going to defer to the rest of my select board. Thank you. Mr. Shell.
Yeah, as I understand it, the state is not issuing a mandate, and what the state is saying is not, it doesn't pair up with what we're doing nicely. And what I'm hearing is that what we've put in place already has improved the water situation here in Chatham. That's point one. Point two is, at least anecdotally, there may be some enforcement opportunity based on what your report, the 93 letters, et cetera, plus what we hear anecdotally from basically the community that could improve that situation, perhaps as much as the cutting off the hand watering. So I guess my view here, subject to better thoughts around the table, would be that if we're going to try to increase the stringency of our regulation, that we do it in terms of enforcement rather than in terms of and enforcement in terms of more patrols, so to speak, or higher fines rather than restricting watering, which, at least according to what we're hearing, it falls more on people who are observing the restrictions than people who perhaps are not.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Tom. Hi, Tom. If we were to consider the banning of handheld watering, I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, would we still be exempting the restrictions that we had before, which were health, safety, agriculture, livestock, and core functions of businesses that need water?
That's correct.
Okay, so what I'm seeing.
And I just want to go on record as saying that, while, the pumpage is down, like I had indicated, it's 3.3% less than the same time last year. So the restrictions are working based on what the board has put in place. We were just trying to follow suit with what the mandates, what they came out with for this latest, level 3. So, and the other thing too is I am putting together a whole packet for the 6th of September, which is next meeting. Maybe it's something you want to just think about and look at that at the next meeting. Let's see where the numbers are going into the beginning of September. That gives us another week and more material and data coming in, so we can all make a a decision that's good for everybody.
Ms. Davis?
And thank you, Tom, for that, because I think we can consider this in another week is for sure. But what I'm seeing is a lot of angst amongst the community. We have a bit of, the thought process of people that are looking at the conservation of a resource that, may not be getting, may not be rebounding as quickly as it did in past years, meaning the entire, lens that we're working off of anyway. And the idea that we are into a drought, and reading some of the things that I've read that, we're now looking at this as not, New England that got the rain every month and we were okay. As the climate change issue is coming forth, we're looking at droughts being more of the norm for New England than they used to be. And conservation of water is going to be, I don't care, across the board, is going to become something that we really are going to have to address in many ways, because otherwise you're going to see, these luscious green lawns and then, and people will just be having, dead lawns. And there's a lot of angst around that for people. I think the community should be looking at the idea of working together and figuring out a solution to conserving water the best we can going forward in the midst of this climate change that we're dealing with. Just look at Lake Mead right now and see what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. DeCastro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think that I agree with the select board member Davis. I think we should wait until next week before taking any action on considering the banning of watering. I would ask that, Tom, that your people take a close look over the next week as to whether hand watering is actually contributing to the problem significantly enough to justify banning it. I'm not sure that it is. I don't know what anecdotal information we have on it. With respect to enforcement, I agree with Mr. Shell. My impression or my recollection is from the most recent report from Pam Jones in your department that we haven't actually fined anyone as yet. Is that a correct statement? I didn't think we had. We've sent enforcement letters. And obviously, those letters have succeeded in identifying some properties that are not on town water. But I didn't think there were any fines today. Do we know?
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I was off this past week and Pam was off this week.
Yeah. She
I'm
sent
not really
something
sure
in.
what went on.
Yeah, she sent something in last week, and as I recall, that's what it said. She had a complete breakdown of the numbers. And I have a question for, I guess, town council or Dr. Duncanson. If we want to increase the fines, because now it's $200 a day per violation, do we have to have a public hearing? I think it's probably a good thing to do that, but Pat?
Good evening, members of the board. Selectman DeCastro, I would suggest that you follow the same procedures you would use to adopt the fines initially, which typically does involve a public hearing. While the board does have somewhat extraordinary powers under your water restriction bylaw, increasing in fines is, in terms of the numerical amount of the fines, is something that I would suggest should be done upon deliberation at a public hearing.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify something. Earlier in the meeting, I requested the opinion of town council regarding private wells. In seeking that information, I just really want to get all the facts on the table and information that we heard from the chair of the Summer Residence Committee is useful as well. And I've heard Dr. Duncanson make similar statements in the past about the differentiation between where the water is coming from private wells versus the general aquifer and the various levels. I don't know what the facts are, but I think we should get all that information if we are ever to consider imposing restrictions on private well owners. So I'm not necessarily advocating that we do that, impose that restriction, but I do want to get the information because there's a lot of conversation in town about it. and we should get that clarified. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, totally understand,
Thank you,
Mr. Castro, and I just want to remind everybody on the select board that we have this as a standing agenda item for every single meeting going forward. And we'll be meeting on the 6th, and we'll be meeting every week thereafter, so we can consider this as an ongoing issue, obviously. Mr. Metters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple thoughts. I mean, obviously, this is something that we're not just going to discuss for this season. This is going to be ongoing. This is, as Selectman Davis mentioned, this is an ongoing topic. So we got to factor in what we're doing for this season, preparation for next season, probably preparation for the following season. So whatever we do, we got to be fair and equitable, and clarify any outstanding questions. There's some clear questions out there. Let's factor that in. And because I struggle with this, I'll be honest with you. I mean, and I'm going to say this very delicately, but I'll probably bite my tongue for saying this. I mean, I have a commercial piece of property downtown that is a dust bowl. It's as solid as concrete. Yet every other night, there's a municipal piece of property in front of me that has an irrigation going off every other night. And they're trying their best to salvage a project, and even that's struggling. So we got to kind of figure out what's the best way to manage things in an appropriate way. So collectively as a community, we got to figure this out. So, and we can do it. We certainly can do it. But I just want to be fair and equitable for everybody. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. And in my summary thoughts, I'll echo some of the board members as well. I just, hand watering is keeping in my yard plants alive, and that's it. They're half dead anyway. Their flowers are gone and they're all dried up and stuff, but they're keeping the plants alive. If I stop hand watering, they're going to die. So anyway, that's number one. Number two, certainly appreciate all the conservation measures that we've had in place, and that they're actually, we're showing results, some results. So that gives me some heart that we're certainly on the right track. And I think we've been fairly aggressive in implementing the restrictions. So I'm all for saving the aquifer and all for one for all. But to go to no hand watering, which I am not convinced yet is a major contributor of our shortfall in water, seems fairly draconian to me. That's all. So I do want to know the facts, as Selectman Castro has pointed out, and I think an emphasis on enforcement, as Selectman Shell has pointed out, is also appropriate. So anyway, more to come. We'll bring it up again next week. We'll get more data, and on we go. I don't think anybody's got a motion yet this evening or prepared for this evening. But it is ongoing. And to Mr. Metter's point, it seems to me we've been in a drought situation at least the last 2 summers, if not the last 3 summers. So I guess we got to get ahead of it, as we've talked about before a number of times. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay, you bet. Okay. Next item on the agenda is public comments on business agenda. We have Monomoy Regional School District vacancy we're going to announce this evening. We have the town property as stepping stones of declaring it surplus, as the Monomoy Regional School District has excluded that portion of the property from the leased premises. Acceptance of the donation for the Eldridge Garage town parking lot. Options for property tax relief to year-round property owners. Some information there. Committee appointments for energy and climate action, and then the town manager's report. So the business agenda this evening is fairly robust, and so I'll solicit comments from the public. They are on. Anybody online would like to comment on the public business agenda? Mr. Meehan.
Hi, Jamie Meehan, Linden Tree Lane again. With respect to the residential exemption, the Summer Residence Advisory Committee wanted to bring to the Select Board's attention a couple of things. A couple quotes, page 66 in your handout, your packet, is a letter from the finance director of the town saying that the finance director does not recommend that the town adopt or approve the residential exemption. Page 68 of your packet provides another quote from the Board of Assessors that indicates that they do not recommend the support of the residential exemption. The Finance Committee in the past has had support for not approving it, and Summer Residence Advisory Committee has issued a position paper that advises against voting for a residential exemption. Also, the Summer Residence Advisory Committee spent a lot of time on this effort, and I guess our biggest takeaway was that the residential exemption is a possible solution chasing a perceived problem. We do not see a problem with respect to providing the needed tax reduction for permanent residents. Chatham already has one of the lowest tax rates on the Cape, has an average tax bill, and has the second highest assessed value of homes. So for those reasons and many others, the Summer Residence Advisory Committee does not support the approval of the residential exemption. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Any other comments on the business agenda this evening, either here or online? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we'll go on to our first item in the business agenda. It is the Monomoy Regional School District Committee vacancy. Nancy Scott has resigned, so we have a vacancy on the Chatham side of the Monomoy Regional School Committee, and so it's so announced. It has been announced, and we've known about it for a while. I think our job tonight is to set a deadline or a timeline for applications. I'm trying to recall, in years past, have had vacancies on the regional school committee in years past.
Yep.
Month? Was it a month? I honestly don't recall how long we gave applicants. So anyway, Mr. Nicastro and then Ms. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to see the vacancy filled. First of all, let me publicly commend and thank Nancy Scott for her service for the town of Chatham on the school committee. She has been with the committee since the merger with Harwich. I understand she's moved out of town, so that's why she has stepped down, but she deserves a lot of credit for her work. I would like to see perhaps a 30-day period for applying. I think we should post the opening on the town website, perhaps on the main sheet of the town manager each week, and I don't know if we want to put a press release in the Chronicle, but, and the other comment I would make is, or request to Shauna, I think when we last filled a vacancy, we had another applicant who I thought was fairly impressive, and I think we should reach out to that individual in case he might still be interested, just as we do when we have committee vacancies. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Nicastro. Ms. Davis.
Those were my thoughts too,
Yep.
so I'm going to just pass.
Yeah, and I echo them as well. Mr. Shell and Mr. Meadows, any comment? Okay. So let's put a 30-day, oh, Mr. Meadows, go ahead. Yeah.
Not going to split hairs. Just any opposition to make October 1 to be the deadline. It's like 31 days, 32 days. I mean,
No, it's fine.
Same concept. That way people know the first, boom. I mean, we're at the 30th day and just hopefully get a couple good candidates. That'd be good.
That's fine, it's great, yeah. 10-1, a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we set the deadline of October 1st, 2022 for applications to serve and fulfill the vacancy, fulfill the position on the Monomoy Regional School District Committee that currently is pending.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye, and the chair also echoes Mr. Nicastro's comments about Nancy Scott. She's been wonderful. She was there from the beginning. She was a doubter and became convinced and then became very supportive of the region. So many thanks, Nancy. Okay, thanks. Next item of business is the town property of Stepping Stones, and we declare it as a select board surplus for affordable and/or attainable housing, and an amendment to the lease agreement with Monomoy Regional School District to exclude that portion of the property from the leased property. I believe Katie is here, and we also have Mr. Costello online. Katie.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We're here tonight to request that the board surplus a portion, approximately 2.2 acres of town-owned property for affordable and attainable housing. As you may recall, at the December 20th, 2021 meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust reviewed several housing initiatives, including town-owned properties, and had made the suggestion that this was a parcel that should be sought out for affordable and attainable housing. And then at your meeting on April 12th, 2022, the board voted to direct the town manager to request from the Monomoy Regional School District Committee an agenda item to discuss the use of stepping stones, the stepping stones area under their lease with the town, to declare the parcel area surplus so that the town may use the land for affordable and attainable housing. And the town manager and I met with the Monomoy Regional School District Committee on May 12th, and then also again on May 26th. And on May 26th, the school committee voted to declare the portion of land at the Monomoy Regional Middle School adjacent to Stepping Stones Road as surplus. And again, I didn't bring any visuals tonight, but it's really the area that's bound by Stepping Stones Road and the bike trail. So we're here tonight to ask the board to declare that surplus. And then also, I think that town council may speak to the amendment to the lease agreement. But just in the event that the board does declare that surplus, we will need to seek a warrant article at town meeting to do so. But in the meantime, we thought it would be beneficial if staff worked with a consultant to come back with, some sort of test fits on the property to show the board what could actually be built there in the meantime while we're, before town meeting, in the event that that isn't until May.
Yeah, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Katie. So I see that the property is plus or minus 2 acres and has the potential for plus or minus 8 bedrooms as it is right now. And so that's really exciting. And the fact that we could move quickly on this is a great idea. I think this is a really good fit. Town's been working on it for a while, and appreciate all the effort that you and the town manager put forth. Now we have a housing coordinator who's going to move forward with it, so I'm really wholeheartedly supporting that we declare it surplus and then amend the agreement to memorialize it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Nacastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm fully supportive of this. I believe this is the same parcel that was previously proposed by a group in town for the senior center.
That's correct.
And I want to thank the school committee for declaring it surplus. I did have a question. I guess it's for either you, Katie, or the town manager, or Pat Costello. On page 3 of your memo, item 4 says, and this identifies the steps that need to be followed, place an article on a town meeting warrant to authorize the proposed change in use and transfer in custody of the subject property for affordable and attainable housing purposes. Who would, to whom would custody of this property be transferred? Because I thought I read it could be either the select board or the trust. Do we know what the plan or idea is?
I believe that in the end, I believe that it would be transferred to the select board in the event that if it was where our current trust is strictly for affordable housing, and this property would be ideal for a mix of affordable and attainable housing. I think it would be beneficial that it would be the select board so that we could develop both of those types of housing units. But I would also, I see that Pat is available to answer as well.
Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with Katie. The bottom line is both the Select Board and the Affordable Housing Trust have the legal authority to develop this property for affordable housing. As Katie noted, the attainable housing portion of it may make it more advisable to have the property transferred to the care, custody, and control of the Select Board, because that gives you more alternatives for development down the road. The vote of town meeting will not only establish the new purpose to which the property will be dedicated, but it also establishes the border officer under whose control the property would fall. So that's something that should be discussed prior to town meeting so that we can make sure that our article in motion are precisely worded, but I agree with Katie. I think having the property fall within the jurisdiction of the select board is most advantageous.
Thank you, Pat. And Pat, any comments on the lease agreement at all that you want to share with us, or it's pretty straightforward, I thought?
No, it's pretty straightforward, Mr. Chairman. The reason why we agreed to go the lease amendment route is I did discuss the matter with council for the regional school district in the town of Harwich, and quite frankly, what the lease and the agreement provides is that when the regional school committee declares the property surplus, it reverts to the town which owns the property. However, neither document provides any specific process or procedure whereby that reversion is memorialized. So we all agreed that the most concise and most unambiguous way to do this would be to amend the lease agreement to merely reflect the exclusion of this property from the lease going forward. Once that lease amendment, which as you noted, Mr. Chairman, is very straightforward and very simple, is executed by the parties, then there will be no question and no doubt who has ownership and control of that property going forward.
Super, thank you, Pat. Mr. Shell?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's a great development, obviously fully supportive. A couple of questions, though. One, it's my understanding that the school committee's action was specifically conditioned on the use of the property exclusively for affordable/attainable housing. Is that correct?
No, it isn't. The motion that's recorded in the report was to declare a portion of it. They had at an earlier meeting, I think it was the May 12th meeting, talked about specifically specifying the use for the surplus, but when we came back on the 26th, it was a general surplusing of that property back to the town.
Okay, so there's no limitation on our use of it insofar as the school committee is concerned?
No, they simply released it back to the town.
Okay, so Pat, you mentioned that the dedication, if you will, of the purpose to affordable/attainable housing is for the town meeting to establish. I'm just wondering why that wouldn't be something that this board would, in the first instance, declare subject to confirmation, ratification, or whatever by the by town meeting.
The simple answer to that question is that General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 15A governs this particular process. What that statute provides is that in order for a town to change the purpose to which a particular parcel of town-owned land is devoted, number one, it has to be declared no longer necessary for its present purpose by the board or officer that exercises control over it. That's what your board is doing tonight. You're voting to declare this property surplus and no longer necessary for the school purposes to which it was last formally devoted. Then the statute provides that upon that declaration, an article is to be presented to town meeting for the town meeting's vote to formally transfer the purpose and the custody of the property. So what typically transpires is your board certainly plays a role in this process by preparing and submitting to the town meeting the article with the proposed intended use of the property going forward. So that sets the table, if you will, for town meeting's formal vote to transfer.
Well, and I understand that, but I mean, is there no reason why we couldn't tonight, even if it's hortatory or surplusage or whatever, declare an intention to do that as part of the declaration of surplusage?
Absolutely. The board could certainly add that language to whatever vote you propose tonight so that it's crystal clear why you're doing what you're doing. It's just not a mandatory requisite of the statute, but by all means you could do that.
Yeah, I would certainly like to see that. I think that's what everybody expects. And I think, at least as we sit here tonight, that's the purpose of the whole series of transactions, if you will.
Super. Okay, Mr. Metters, and then on to a motion, I think.
Okay, a couple of things. Oh, I think that's exactly what we are kind of doing tonight, because the school committee did say it was not as custodians of the property, they said that parcel is not needed for any school-associated expansions necessary, whatever. So bring it back to the town, and we've teed it up for affordable and attainable housing. So I think we are saying that as interactions tonight is kind of the sentiment and the direction and the tone we're taking that hopefully town meeting will support officially is I think my process. I could be missing something. So, and I could be wrong, but I do know, I mean, I'll admit, developing the property in the beginning wasn't one of my first choice, but if we're going to develop it, this makes complete sense to do it. I think it's obviously clearly needed in the community. It's an area that's going to be close to to schools, close to town. It makes sense to develop it for affordable and attainable housing. So I have no problem with that. I think, the neighborhood, my own personal opinion, as we look at different scenarios of how to develop it properly, that we do so in the spirit of expanding the existing neighborhood there. So whatever those designs may be, we do so that it just expands the existing neighborhood and it fits in and is part of the Chatham's feel. So that's hopefully the direction we take, but we'll have that discussion formally down the road. So I don't have any issue really with this. Hopefully get a couple more rooms for some well-needed housing in this town. So I know it's a small sample in what we really, really need, but it is a step in the right direction. So I fully support this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Meadows. So, yeah, I'm certainly on board big time, as you folks well know. And again, thank the Monomoy Regional School Committee for declaring the land surplus and making it available to the town for affordable and attainable housing. And I would also support Mr. Shell's notion of crafting a motion that includes the phraseology he referenced for affordable and attainable housing. So, Mr. Nicastro, a motion, or Mr. Shell? Mr. Nicastro. Mr. Nicastro.
I was going to try to address Mr. Schell's.
Yeah.
He can.
Oh, please,
this is what I'm doing.
please.
I was going to add a third paragraph to it. So let me offer this motion and see where it goes. I move that the select board declare the 2+ or minus acre property at Stepping Stones Road as shown on the attached survey surplus, and 2, to amend the Monomoy Regional School District lease agreement to memorialize the exclusion of the 2+ or minus acre parcel from the lease premises, and 3, that it is the intention and desire of the select board that this parcel be used for affordable/attainable housing. Does that accomplish your?
That's fine. If you want to add subject to ratification or approval at town meeting, that's fine.
I'll accept that, yeah.
Perfect. So was that a second, Mr. Shell?
That is a second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Mr. Nicastro.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Mr. Meadows.
Aye.
And Mr. Dyken says aye as well. Thanks, you guys. That's great.
Chairman?
Yes, yes, sir.
Just wanted to clarify with town council, under 40, section 15A, I believe this requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Selectman DeCastro. It's a 2/3 vote to change the purpose to which land is utilized.
Good, super, thank you. Next item on our agenda is the acceptance of the donation for the Eldridge Garage Town Parking Lot Project, and I think, Katie, you've got that one as well, and you're still at the microphone.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
You bet.
So as you'll all recall, town officials have been contacted by a seasonal property owner in town who had generously offered to make a donation to the town for the redevelopment of the town-owned Eldridge Garage property, based on the recommendations of the Eldridge Garage Property Planning Committee. The donation will be made to the town through a grant from the National Philanthropic Trust. Town staff has worked, and town council have worked closely with the donor and the donor's attorneys on crafting a donation agreement. This is actually going to be in the form of a grant, and the grant will be made in 4 installments of $375,000 each, totaling up to $1.5 million at various milestones throughout the project that were laid out in the agreement. The grant funds, once received, will reimburse the town for funds expended. If you'll recall, annual town meeting of 2022 appropriated $1,495,555 from available funds, free cash, for the design and construction of site and building improvements. So again, once the grant funds are received, they will close to the undesignated fund balance. So we had provided the donation agreement for your consideration tonight.
Thank you, Katie, very much. Comments or questions for Katie, or comments on the agreement itself? Mr. Nacastro.
Mr. Chairman, I did have a conversation with Katie yesterday, and she forwarded some questions to town council, which we've gotten some responses to. And let me say that I think it's not an unfair statement to say that I was one of the leading members of this board in the acquisition of this property, and also participated along with Select Board Member Davis on the Eldridge Garage Planning Committee, so I'm very supportive of the project. I do have some concern about one provision in the contract, and that is paragraph 1E on page 3.
I'm sorry, E or D?
E.
Thank
It's
you.
a small e, it's on page 3. It's titled Obligation of Account, and it does allow the other side, which is the trust, the following: if, however, for any reason the account, that's the entity that holds the funds that are donated by the donors, at any time in the future lacks sufficient funds to make all payments under this agreement when due in full, NPT, that's the trust, reserves the right to reduce or revoke any and all payments due under this agreement upon written notice to the grantee. And then it goes on to include some language, which I understand was inserted at the direction or request of the town to allow the town to get funding from other sources. Well, my concern is, it's not clear to me if the funds dry up at some point, what that means for the town in terms of its obligations going forward from that point under this contract, which include, among other things, a 10-year prohibition on placement of mobile food vendors on that property. I'm not advocating that that be done. I really have no interest or desire to have mobile food there, but we would be obligating a future Board of Selectmen, future Select Board with this. I'm perfectly willing to trade that obligation for the $1.5 million, but I don't know what happens to the town if, in fact, the funds dry up under this provision. Are we still obligated with those commitments? That concerns me. So I know Pat did respond in an email this afternoon, so I'd like to just throw that out. I'd like to move forward with the agreement. I will say that I'm very appreciative that someone is willing to stand up and pay $1.5 million for this project, but we did secure at town meeting an unconditional vote of $1.5 million from free cash. So the town could, if it wanted to, develop this property on its own without any obligations whatsoever. I'm not proposing that we do that, but we're coming from that position of some strength, I think. So I just wanted to throw that on the table. I don't know if other members of the board feel the way I do, but I'd be interested in hearing from town council. Thank you.
Mr. Shell.
I'll defer to town council if you'd rather hear from him first.
Actually, I'd like to hear from the Select Board first.
Okay, thank you. So, Dean, I did focus on that paragraph. I think your comments are all spot on. However, at the same time, and there are some other features of this contract that have little fuzziness about them, but taken as a whole, I think it is a good contract. And I'll expertise myself just for this purpose and say I've read a lot of contracts. And I think the good faith and the charitable sentiment that's expressed not only by the fact of offering the donation, but basically by the complete terms of the contract, left me comfortable that these are questions that, as I say, they're legitimate, but I think we can live with them. They're not quite necessarily what we used to call imaginary horribles, but they're pretty remote possibilities. And I just think in the spirit of the whole business that we should say thank you very much and accept that they're putting their faith in us a little bit to complete the project, and we can do the same in return.
Thank you, Mr. Shell. Mr. Metters.
Where do I want to start? So I did very much support this property being developed. As has been mentioned, we have the $1.5 million the town meeting has allotted. We have a very generous gift on the gift offer on the table. I felt I had to press a little bit because it was about noon today that I got enough information about enough about the donor that I could do my due diligence to feel a little more comfortable about my feeling on the donation. And for what little time I did have, I do think that the source of these funds is genuine. It's a true charitable donation. There's been some history of donations from the entity, so I don't think it's pure. That did give me some relief in that. I just wish I didn't get it just at noon today, but so be it. I would like to have a little more clarification on the potential use conditions that may be imposed on the property of who exactly is going to determine that, because, food truck is one of them. Frankly, I don't think food trucks would survive down there, but that's a side comment. I guess, who exactly is going to be the final determiner of if something is within the scope of this agreement or not a scope. Is the select board, is the town manager? So I would like a little more expansion on that question. It is a generous gift, but it comes with some strings attached, which is kind of delicate. It's a delicate conversation for this community, and I'm struggling with this one because I do, and like I say, it is a $1.49 million gift that would take some relief off the taxpayers on other areas, and we're certainly going to need that money for some housing and some waterway infrastructures and what have you not. So we definitely can use that money in other areas that would benefit the entire community. So that is probably where I'm leaning toward, accepting the gift, but I'm doing it with some reluctance because I do have a little bit of concern about the use restriction for a 10-year period on a piece of town property. So those are my thoughts at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Ms. Davis.
So I'm supporting this. I sat in on the initial meeting with the donor, and when he presented this proposal, I was chair at the time. And I think his intent is extremely sincere, and I don't put a lot of thought into the mobile vendor restriction piece after having conversation with staff's recommendations, that we took into consideration when we were talking about the mobile vending prior, that, it's a parking garage. It's a paid parking spot, and so people would have to come in to pay to park and then eat, and it just didn't make sense logistically to have mobile vendors down there. And so that piece of it I don't really have a problem with. I'm going to defer to the attorneys on the board that have read the contract and feel comfortable with it, and wait for our town council to weigh in with more details of that. But I'm supportive of moving forward with this and appreciate the donors' generosity in really moving something forward and having Elder's Garage look like a really nice municipal parking facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And I'll turf it to Mr. Costello for any comments you have. I'll have some summary comments as well. Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer Corey's question directly, the select board has the ultimate authority to determine how this property will be used. In my view, your legal authority in that regard derives from two particular statutes. Chapter 40, Section 3 gives select boards general control and authorization to determine the use of town-owned property unless there's another statute to the contrary. There is none here. Secondly, Chapter 44, Section 53A of the general laws provides that any gift of funds to the town has to be approved by the select board. Oftentimes, gifts such as this are subject to certain terms and conditions, and once the town accepts a gift, it is bound by the donative intent of the donor. It has to expend the gift of funds for the specific purpose for which it is they have been donated to the town. So what the select board would in effect be doing, should it approve this grant agreement as drafted, is contractually agreeing to a limitation in the types of uses to which the property can be devoted. It is not subjecting the property to any real property restriction. There's no recordable instrument that's going to be accompanying this agreement. It's strictly a contractual arrangement. We are agreeing in consideration of acceptance of the $1.5 million grant to restrict the use of the property to those specific uses recommended by the Eldridge Garage Property Committee in their report to the select board some time ago. Nothing more, nothing less. We are agreeing to those terms for a period of 10 years. And I can assure you that this particular language in the agreement was very much a subject of discussion, revision, rewriting. It went back and forth for quite some time to arrive at the draft of the agreement that you have before you today relative to the use of the property. So I believe that everything in the agreement is perfectly legal and legitimate. I do believe, as several members of the board have noted today, that the donor's intent here is in fact charitable, it's genuine. They do have a particular interest, however, in not allowing commercial uses beyond those recommended by the Eldridge Garage Committee for the property. Initially, they had requested that restriction indefinitely. By negotiation, we've agreed to limit it to a 10-year period. So all the board would in fact be doing, should it approve this term, is contractually agreeing to not change its position vis-a-vis the use of the property. Happy to answer any further questions.
Mr. Nacastro has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pat, I want to come back to paragraph E. So what happens? Does the contract become a nullity going forward? You used the term novation in your email, and perhaps if you could explain that, because that's what I'd like to know. Where does it leave us if, in fact, the trust says we no longer have sufficient funds in the account, we're not going to pay anything going forward?
Right. And that is probably the second most deliberated and negotiated clause in the agreement being, as I noted. There is quite a bit of back and forth, has been quite a bit back and forth on that clause. But to answer your question, in my view, the consideration being offered by the grantor, i.e. payment of $1.5 million, is certainly a material term to this agreement. In the event that they do not fulfill that agreement, or for some reason do not have that level of funding in the account, in my view, that would be a material term of the agreement that has become unfulfillable. It could, in my opinion, be considered a novation of the agreement, which is a change of the material terms of the agreement, which could very well impact the enforceability of opposite considerations going forward. So it is a gray area. It's a legitimate point that you have noted. What I would suggest should the board so desires, I could always reach out to counsel for NPT and further discuss that particular circumstance with him. See if we can't come to some understanding or resolution with amended language that would clarify that point to the board's satisfaction, and we could come back. But in my view, I believe a compelling argument could be made that such a failure to pay the full amount of the grant amount could very well relieve the town from the restrictions going forward. However, NPT and their council may take a different view on that point, so it may well be worth trying to sort out in the interim.
I'm not looking to be relieved of those restrictions. I want that clear to everyone. I'm not looking to put mobile food vendors on that property. We've already made a determination. We didn't think that property was suitable for it, at least in the current cycle, and that may be true going forward. I sense that there is significant support for going forward with this agreement tonight among members of the board. I don't want to be a stick in the mud. I do have some angst about okaying a contract that has a significant term that is somewhat ambiguous in terms of its potential implications going forward. Mr. Shaw makes a good case for the genuineness of the intended donor, and I've never had any contact with the donor, but from my understanding, that is a correct assessment of the circumstance. So I'm not going to press for further amendment to this unless the rest of the board would like to get that clarified, in which case we could defer this action on this tonight and get back to it in another week. But I'm anxious to hear what others have to say.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Castro, and thank you, Mr. Costello. And I have too had the benefit of meeting with the donor and the representatives of the trust, and I can portray their intent as extremely genuine, and they will, I mean, I'm not going to guarantee that they'll fulfill their obligation, but their intent certainly in the signing of this contract is to fully fulfill their obligation under this contract. And I would just say it was palpable, it's intentional, palpable, and they're extremely interested in seeing that property developed in the brilliant plan that was ascribed or described by the Eldridge Parking Garage Planning Committee, that Mr. Nicastro, which you had the dream team, if you will, assembled. So I had met with them, and we had prolonged negotiations, and I'll tell you that these folks will, unless the world comes to an end, they will fulfill their obligation. That's the sense I got. That's what I'll impart to the select board. So I am going to vote in favor of concluding this, approving this contract tonight. So, Mr. Shell, Ms. Davis, a motion?
I would move that we approve, that we accept the donation of the National Philanthropic Trust and approve the entry of Chatham into the agreement as presented to us this evening.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can
Mr. Nicastro.
I ask a follow-up question to, I guess, Mr. Costello? Is it a correct understanding that once this contract is approved by the trust, because I guess it goes before their body next, and is signed, at that point, the donor will deposit the $1.5 million total into the trust account, or do they do it in installments? Do we know?
I don't have the answer to that question, Selectman Nicastro.
Okay.
Once they sign the agreement, by general legal parlance, as you know, they would be deemed to be committing themselves to the obligations set forth therein. I'm not sure how the individual accounts that NPT maintains are funded and maintained.
Okay.
And this was the additional language that was added to the clause that you questioned. was basically put into the standard boilerplate agreement that NPT uses in an effort to show the firm commitment of these particular donors to go above and beyond and to do whatever supplemental work may be necessary to make sure we have the funds. But I don't have the answer to that.
Has the trust itself informally signed on to this language? I know that, I understand, you've been negotiating, I guess, with the donor's attorney.
Well, I believe he represents
Okay.
both the trust and the advisors, as they're called in the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this may or may not be the case in this situation. Normally, the way a donor advised fund works is the funds are there, and the donor has to designate a recipient for a specific grant. And so my assumption, without any basis other than what Pat just said, would be the funds are there. What has to be done is the designation of Chatham as a recipient of the grant has to be made, which presumably would be done more or less simultaneously with the signing of the agreement. But that's all my assumption about how these things work.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll go around the table. Mr. Nacastro?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Mr. Metters?
Aye.
And Mr. Dyken says aye as well. Vote unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, options for property tax relief, year-round resident property owners, abatements, exemptions, et cetera. We have this is an informational agenda item in advance of our classifying the tax rate at our next meeting on September 6th. There's some new information here and some information that we've seen prior. I did make a commitment to the town to do a deeper dive on the residential tax exemption, much to the consternation of the SRAC, but that's what we're going to do. So Alex, welcome, and let's hear about the residential tax exemption, all the little nuances, and what it can do for Chatham or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the board. Yes, in your packet, I provided a lot of the information that you had seen previously, along with some new information as we polled some of the other towns on the Cape for some of their experience, as well as some examples, and I'll run through those in the slideshow so everybody can follow along at home as well. I do have those in here. So again, just to recap some of the options that we have for exemptions, there are statutory exemptions, the veterans clauses 22 and 22E, the blind clause 37, and the senior clause 41C, again with certain stipulations, and those are available at the assessor's website and or at their office if anyone has questions on whether or not they would qualify for any of these exemptions. We also talked about previously tax deferral and possibility for abatements. The tax deferral clause 41A is based on age, ownership, domicile, and income restriction. It just defers the tax. It doesn't abate or exempt any of the tax. It defers it until transfer or death of the owner. And then we have the senior work-off program that the town has adopted, which is a $500 abatement in exchange for hours worked, and there's no income restrictions for that. And again, that is age-based. But tonight we're going to really dive into the residential exemption, as I said, in advance of the tax reclassification, tax recap hearing next week. So this is the residential exemption is under Mass General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5C. And I've highlighted some of the language in the law, and this is the law. So it's respect to each parcel of real property, and a parcel could be multiple use, and it applies to the residential portion only. And it's under Class 1, which is the residential class in each city. And it's the option of the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board. And again, that's an annual vote at the tax classification hearing. However, that can be held any time before the tax classification hearing to have and adopt a residential exemption. And again, it's the principal residence of a taxpayer as used by the taxpayer for income tax purposes. So again, that's as of the taxpayer's residence as of January 1st. The taxpayer must be the owner and not just an occupant, and it's the principal residence as reported on the state income tax. And these are all forms that would be required by the assessing office should the town adopt the residential exemption. And the exemption is in addition to any exemptions such as the veterans exemption allowable under Section 5. However, in no instance shall the taxable valuation of such property after all applicable exemptions be reduced below 10% of its full and fair cash value. So I have an example of that as well. So there are the towns on the Cape that have adopted the residential exemption, and this was in FY 2022. Provincetown has just set their tax rate for FY 2023, so they did have it again this year. Provincetown's at 25%, Truro's at 25%, Wellfleet's at 20%, Nantucket on the islands is at 25%, and Barnstable at 20%. Interesting to note that Nantucket has had the residential exemption since 1988. It's well established over there. And in Barnstable, we don't have a lot of comparative data for Barnstable as they're a large commercial base. So it really doesn't compare well to Chatham because we have a very small commercial base here. So looking at the residential exemption, this chart was on page 3 of your report. Unfortunately, in the report, we transposed the secondary and primary. So we do have, Nantucket has 80% secondary residents, 20% primary. Provincetown, the same percentage split. Truro is almost at that amount, 78% secondary, 22% primary. Wellfleet is getting closer to where Chatham is at 65% secondary, 35% primary. And Chatham is, at this time, is 56% secondary homes, 44% primary homes. And these are fluid numbers. These change every year. With any of the exemptions, especially the residential exemption, a taxpayer would have to apply for it on an annual basis. And again, that's why we know that this changes every year. Again, you can see the tax rate. This was for FY 2022. The first figure is without the exemption. The second figure would be for the exemption. That would be for the residential class. And you can notice that the tax rate does increase with the exemption as we have the exemption applied to the primary domiciles, those who qualify, and that has to be made up through the properties that do not qualify for the exemption. And then looking at this as well, we've listed the number of exemption filings for the residential exemption, and you will note that Nantucket has quite a few with 2,280. Provincetown, Truro, and Wellfleet are all below 900. And then Chatham, the estimate is 3,256 properties would qualify for the exemption. Again, we don't know that until we collect all the information.
And Alex, also 3,256 folks would have to apply and be approved.
That's correct. They would have to apply, submit all the documents. That would have to be reviewed and vetted by the assessing office to make sure that it does qualify before entering the exemption into the system.
Would you go back to the prior slide just for a second, Alex? The 56-44 split, secondary, primary, has that secondary number gone up of late? The 56?
It's actually decreased.
Oh, it decreased, so primary has gone up.
Yes, the primary has gone up. We found that partially maybe due to COVID,
Right.
quite a few people moved down here full-time, and
Right.
it seems to be staying around the same number.
Thank you, Mr.
Alex, just what happens, we're positing 3256 exemption filings, presumably arithmetically that gives you the 507 adjusted tax rate. What happens if half of those people, hypothetically speaking, just don't apply, so they pay the higher rate?
Right, they would pay the higher rate, and they wouldn't receive that. If we have more properties that do apply and are qualified, then we would have to hit the overlay account for those exemptions.
Yeah, that I understand, but my question is, does that create a surplus to what your anticipated tax revenues for the year will be, and if so, what do you do with that?
No, because the residential tax rate would be $5.07. And I don't think it would create a surplus. We're still raising the same amount of,
I understand that, but I'm saying, what if your assumed number of exemption filings is materially, substantially less than what you, just because people don't do it or whatever the reason?
Does it affect?
In other words, if half of the people who are entitled to the exemption
Don't take advantage.
don't take it for whatever reason, don't we have a major surplus?
because we're still raising the same amount of tax levy. We still are raising $38 million, say, through taxation. And we've based the tax rate on the best guesstimate that we have for the number of filings. Would the tax rate, it would probably close to undesignated fund balance, and the tax rate would be less the next year. I'm not sure if Dale has this information. I know she's on the call.
So you're saying it would be adjusted the next year to account for the surplus of funds received because a substantial material, half the people who are entitled to it did not apply for the exemption.
Alex, wouldn't they then have paid at the 507 level and we'd have
Yes.
more money than we anticipated?
Yeah, they would pay
That's
at
what Mr. Shell is asking.
Yeah, they
That's
would
the
pay at the
question.
507 level, and again, but again, we only have a commitment for so much. I'm not sure how that works. I've never thought of that question. Dale, if you're on, do you have an answer for this?
I don't have an answer for that. However, I can tell you that the Department of Revenue does monitor if you do have a surplus like you're stating. I've been told that they will basically give you a break your first couple of years until it kind of plays itself out and people get adjusted. But as far as the implications, as far as, how long they're going to let that go, they're not. The Department of Revenue isn't. Basically, people have told me they let it go for like 4 years at the tops. But other than that, as far as it exactly plays out within the budget, that wasn't really, I haven't really discussed that with anybody at all in other towns. Just the comment that the Department of Revenue does follow the percentages and see how accurate you are.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Mr. Nacastro has a question?
On that point, do you determine the amount of the exemption based on the potential number of filings? You do that up front, or do you do it after?
Yeah, yes.
You do that, okay.
Yes.
You don't do it
Yes,
after
we
the
do.
applications are
That's
pending?
why-
Okay.
No, you have to do it up front in order to, because number one, people have up till April 1st to, apply. So you might be going into your overlay. So no, you want to do that up front. And that's another process that it is going to take quite a bit of time. And that's why they give you a couple of years to kind of go through and filter through and see, let you be a little bit more accurate, because it is a very hard number to predict. So that's why they give you that leeway, so to speak,
Right.
in the beginning.
Right, that's a major assumption in the analysis as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think we went through, the assessor's office went and looked at, how many people are registered to vote, who has Chatham addresses. But again, there'd be more strict documentation that would be required in order to qualify for the residential exemption.
Thank you, Alex.
And just another look at some of the numbers. So if we're assuming 3,256 exemptions, people will qualify. Then we do have the annual review of real estate transactions and deaths that the assessing office does. And you can see that the total for us is 1,184 of those two combined. So quite a few transactions that they have to change these every single year and review them. Okay, going to some of the examples. Again, without the residential exemption on the left-hand side, with the residential exemption at 20% on the right-hand side. For a single-family property assessed at $750,000. Without the residential exemption, the tax rate will be $3.88. The tax due on that would be $2,910. with the residential exemption, 20% of, which would reduce the assessed value by the $252,869, tax rate $4.25, the tax due $2,112, so a savings of about just over $797, and that's for the yearly savings. Questions?
Yeah, how did you get the exemption amount?
That is what the residential exemption does, is it's based on the calculation of 20% value, and that's what's exempted from any property that qualifies for the residential exemption.
But it's not 20% of 750K.
No, it's the same exemption for all properties, no matter what the value is. So when we go to a property valued at $500,000, you can still see the same exemption applied to that value. So again, an increased tax rate without the exemption, and with the exemption, this resident would save about $890.
Mr. Nacastro has a question.
It's 20% of the average assessed value in town. That's
Yes.
how, that's where you come up with that
That's where you get the
252,000.
Right, it's not per the individual property. It's the same amount of exemption applies to anyone who qualifies.
So I don't know if you have completed your presentation because you asked for questions.
No, I have a couple
No,
more slides on
I
this,
jumped in with
but
questions. I think it's okay as we go because this is fairly obtuse, and so we want to get clarity as we go.
She may touch on what I'm going to ask because I think she knows what I'm going to ask. I did submit some questions to you and Dale, and maybe they're on your upcoming slides, with specific reference to the towns of Wellfleet, Provincetown, and Truro. Do we have even a ballpark from informal conversation, as I know there's nothing data-wise that you've been able to find, on what percentage of the annual tax revenues in those towns is paid by summer residents or seasonal residents? Because SRAC has, working with you, determined that in Chatham, the seasonal residents pay 65% of the tax rate, of the tax bill. Do we have anything comparable?
yeah, no, they didn't have any information to provide us with that. They just went with the percentages of the secondary and primary. So they just strictly went by the parcels, not that qualify, not the dollar amount.
Do we have any information, again, informally, from those three towns on what the average savings per individual year-round homeowner is, or range? Were their assessors able to tell us?
I didn't get that, Dale. I don't know if you got that, but I don't think that was something that we were able to get as well, unfortunately.
Does Dale have anything?
No, yes, I'm on line. No, we did not discuss that. Majority of the discussion was pertaining to the percentages in town as far as secondary and residency. We did discuss that when we talked that none of the towns could state that, it kept anybody in town. As fact as they say that it didn't, it never changed those split numbers. We did not talk about the average staying in the town because our tax rates are quite different. So that's why I believe the conversation didn't go in that direction.
Well, we're not going to have our hearing until the 6th. If there is any additional information specific to those three towns, just from the perspective, the experiential perspective of the assessing departments in those towns, that would be helpful to know. Your point that you raised just now, and you brought it up at the assessors meeting last week, which I attended, that their experience shows that it really hasn't made a difference either way in attracting or keeping working class families in town. If I'm overstating it, please correct me. I think is an important one, because that's the argument. That's the argument that advocates for this have made in this town, that this is great relief that would help keep additional younger families or working class families in town. And the experience in these towns seems to be to the contrary. So that's an important piece of information. Thank you. Those are my points.
But if I might, Mr. Nacastro, that's an opinion. That's not based on data. So I would want to see how many young people, lived in Wellfleet prior to the exemption and how many lived after, in order to buttress or support that opinion. I would also like to make the point that if you look at the impact on those have assessed values between 750 versus 500, that, the less valued your assessed value is, the more the residential exemption means to you. So those folks that might not have a highly assessed home, it'll mean a lot more to them in terms of what they pay on their taxes and the relief that they will experience.
Yeah, you can see that on this
May
slide.
I address one thing?
Sure.
I can say, I just came from a summer conference of the Barnstable County Assessing Association, and it was all of them who have the residential exemption said, because Yarmouth brought it up, myself brought it up, they all said they could definitely say that it has not brought any new or kept anybody in their town. Has it provided relief to residents? Yes. But has it kept people there? It was an absolute no by every single town who presented, and every town who had the residential exemption presented that day.
Ms. Davis.
Just to clarify.
Ms. Davis, thank you, dear.
Again, I think that might be an opinion and can't be quantified. I don't know how that's quantified.
Mr. Shell?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I want to come at this a little bit differently, and ask, we're talking about a universe of roughly 3,200 potential homes that would be entitled to the exemption. And those homes have a value of, pick a number, but let's say as little as perhaps $300,000 or $400,000, and as much as could be $10 million for that matter.
The break-even point would be
Yeah,
2.8.
I understand, but all that does is tell you how many people who are residents it doesn't benefit. And by the way, I want to announce, I would pay higher taxes, just so everybody understands where what my personal interest is here. And I should say, in principle, I would love to do something like this if it benefits a significant number of people who could use the benefit. I'll leave it at that. But to get at that point, as well as this opinion issue that we were just talking about, if you take $750,000 as a hypothetical number, do we have any idea how many of those 3,200 people, residents, would be in that general range of $750,000?
I don't think we looked at that. I don't think there's a way to do that until we actually ask people for, documentation and look at the, individual properties, and that would be reviewing 3,256 properties.
Well, we do have some idea what the assessed valuation of
Those problems.
all properties in Chatham is, right?
Right, we have the valuation for all properties, so.
So, and again, I'm not asking, I think it would be useful if we could say that of the 3,200, 200 benefit or 1,000 benefit. I mean, some ballpark number that gives you a sense that there is a significant number of people out there who would get pick a number. Your numbers are between, let's say, $800 and $900 benefit. That's the kind of thing that I would like to know as the price of putting up with all of these other complications, shall we say, that this thing entails.
Yeah, we did look at that in the report with the break-even point is 2.8 million. And there's 139 properties that were equal to or above that. So of the properties, the 3,200, 139 wouldn't qualify.
Right, okay.
But the vast majority would.
Right.
Not to interrupt, but the vast majority would then. But to your point.
Well, they would, but I mean, somebody who's the 140th is going to get $1.98.
$1.98.
Right, yeah.
But how many at 750 would
That's what
actually?
I want to know.
I understand, and I think that we could parse the assessed valuations of all the residents in town and get an understanding of that 3,100 now, or whatever. How many are 750 or below, or 800 or below?
I could Art, Dale Kelly here.
Yep.
What I could run for you at the classification hearing is, I could run you everyone with a Chatham zip code, who have a value of, say, whatever number you would like me to run it at, whether it be at 750,000, 500,000. You choose a number, and I could tell you, at least give you an idea of that might help you determine.
Thank you,
So
Dale.
what number would you like me to run at that? I'd be more than happy to.
Dale, hang on one second. I like 750, 800, but
Yeah, I was going to say maybe a range from up to 500 and 500 to $1 million or something that would give us a better idea of what that number can be, would probably be the helpful, if it's a range. And then it's not just one set
I would
number.
also like to comment on Mr. Shell's notion of cost benefit. So we'd like to know, like to try to quantify what the ultimate benefit might be versus what the ultimate pain, suffering, and cost of so implementing might be. That's what we're trying to do as a board. Mr. Nicastro.
Yeah, I just want to inject into that determination that we have 1,850 properties which are in trust, of which 575 have a Chatham mailing address. So that kind of complicates or colors the result you're going to get unless you have the breakdown by trust, and not all trusts are going to qualify.
But the vast majority will, I mean, I would opine. I mean, that's.
Well, we don't know.
I know.
And that's like
my
you're
opinion.
criticizing the data from the anecdotal data, saying that was an opinion. That's an opinion from people that are working every day
Right.
on this field.
So perhaps Dale can find out, or
Maybe she
or
can.
inform us.
Well,
On the trust you have to be, not only do you have to be a trustee, you also have to be a beneficiary of the trust.
That's right.
Just to let you know. And it would be rather difficult. That was the other subject that was brought up with all the assessors. Their hardest time they have when reviewing applicants is with trusts. They've brought legal into it many times because trusts can get quite complicated. So I don't know if I can determine that, because obviously the goal of some trusts is for not people to know who they are in the trust. So basically a nominee trust, they do have to record it at the Barnstable Registry of Deeds, who the beneficiaries are and the trustees, but the others do not. We'll have to ask them very nicely, or they're going to have to provide it, along with their federal income tax in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Dale. Mr. Shell.
Yeah, that brings me back to the question that I was asking hypothetically at the outset, namely, what happens if half the 3,200 don't apply for the exemption? Let me ask the question, Art, did you say 1,800 properties in trust?
It's yeah, 1875.
Well, I don't care what
according to
but
memo.
1,800, are those 1,800 included in the 3,200 that we say are entitled to the exemption?
I think only 575 would be, because those are the ones with the Chatham address.
Right,
Am I reading that right?
yeah.
That 575 of those, of that 1,800 have a Chatham address. So the others presumably could be seasonal residents that hold property in trust.
And they might not qualify. We'd
Well,
have
no,
to-
that I
yeah.
understand, but I'm trying to understand your 3,200 number of people who are entitled to the exemption.
Again, that's our best guesstimate right now.
Correct. but it
I
includes
understand
my-
that. How many of these trusts does that include? Do you have any, I mean, is it the 575 that have the Chatham address?
Dale, can you confirm the 570?
Yes, that would be
Okay, okay,
575.
okay.
Okay, so even if you
And
do,
also the LLCs will not qualify as well.
Are there any LLCs in that 30?
No.
They're not.
so you take your 3,500 minus 5, or
3,200.
3,200 minus 5, and call it 27, and do the analysis on 27.
Well, some trusts will qualify, some
And
won't.
most of the nominees will, I would think.
Yeah,
Yes,
I would
thank
hope.
you. My opinion.
You can have trusts that don't have recited beneficiaries,
Yeah, yeah.
you can have an irrevocable trust
Yeah.
where you completely give up control over your property, and you may not be a beneficiary, a named beneficiary. You may be a life tenant, for example.
So the most conservative approach in our analysis would be to take the 32 minus all those trusts and do the analysis there.
I suppose.
That would be the most
Some of those
conservative
trusts,
approach.
maybe half of the trusts will call, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you make
None of us know.
some assumption, just to get the data, just to get some kind of normative data so that we can make informed decisions.
well, I can tell you this, when we came up with our number, it comes from our secondary personal property accounts. And during our recertification period, we sent out a form that everyone has to fill out when you have personal property, and that is the contents of your home, because that's what you're paying on for a personal property bill. And we sent that out to every single one of our personal property accounts that had an address that was outside or that we thought that we already currently had under a personal property account. And we did get a pretty clear number because we had over 4,000 people respond to that. And it was a great time to do it because we knew the residential exemption was coming, to get a clear number as close as we could. And I think that did a great job of that. Do we definitely have openings with the trust? Absolutely. But I think that number is a fairly close number. But like I said, the Department of Revenue does give you that leeway because they know it's a tricky number to accurately get.
Okay. Mr. Castro, yeah, Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to add at this point that this is my 8th year on the board. I think we've had to vote on this 7 times, and 7 times I voted not to approve the residential tax exemption. I did support Mr. Taylor's petition last May because I thought it was innovative and creative, and I thought it deserved a hearing on Beacon Hill. And if it's filed again, I may support it again. I don't know which way I'm going to vote next week because we're going to have a public hearing, and I want to be fair to everyone who's going to come before us. But I do want to say that this presentation tonight, I told Alex this on the phone this morning, is the most comprehensive, data-driven report we've received in my 7 times dealing with this, now the 8th on this board. So I very much appreciate that. I know we're going to come up with some additional information, and that would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Castro. Mr. Meadows and then Mr. Shell.
Just a quick question so to get a full picture of what's going on. And now that we've talked to other communities that have the tax exemption in place, managing if we were to adopt it, and managing it, what type of resources are necessary? Is it something that we already have a staff in place for? Is there some type of additional assets or resources that we would need to do? Based on the communities that have already gone through this, what would our projection look like?
We are estimating with 3,256 properties that we would probably have to have a half-time assistant in the assessing office to help enter all these. We looked at currently we have 105 exemptions right now, and it takes the assessing office about an hour and a half to enter those, with all 3 people entering them. So that's 105 exemptions. And if we have 3,256 plus reviewing all of the trusts, everything, I estimated it's about 3.5 weeks of entering exemptions for the residential exemption.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Shell.
Yeah, I want to echo Mr. Nacastro's comments about the report. I asked some questions early on, I think, of the town manager about this, and this answered virtually all of them, other than what we discussed here, so thank you for that. Earlier, a comment was made to the effect that you had recommended against this. I may have missed it in the materials that we had, and I just wanted to ask you directly what your recommendation is with respect to this proposal.
Well, our recommendation tonight is, you have the tax classification hearing next week, would be not to adopt it for FY 2023, as we would need time to vet and get systems in place. There are several factors right now. We are losing our bill printing through Globe Printing. They're not going to be printing bills for municipalities anymore. If we were to adopt the residential exemption, it would delay getting the bills out, so we'd have to wait until we did have an RFP. Barnstable County put out an RFP for printing services for all the towns, so we're waiting to hear back. We've received the results. We're just vetting all those companies that replied, so we're waiting for that to be awarded. VADAR will need a couple of weeks to have the bridge between our assessing system and the tax billing system. So if the bills were going to go out by the statutory date of October 1st, it probably, if it was adopted this year, it wouldn't be able, we'd probably get the bills out in December.
Okay, thank you. One other question anyway. How many, do we have any idea, ballpark again, how many adult summer residents there are in Chatham?
I don't know. Number
I
of
mean,
adult,
we can assume that it's at least the number of, the 44%, which is whatever it is, 2,600 or
and
so.
usually if you say 2 people per household,
Could be 5,200.
right.
Almost as many as we have registered voters in Chatham. Is that, I mean, we're in that ballpark, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that, I mean, that's a factor that, at least in my thinking, is a pertinent factor.
Okay, Alex, do you have other slides, or are?
No, I just moved to the end again because this is, the tax classification hearing is scheduled for next week.
Yep.
You'll vote on the 4 options: the residential factor, open space discount, of which we have none, the residential exemption, and a small business exemption. And then I just wanted to point out that this is an annual vote, usually at the classification hearing. But again, we stated that the vote on the residential exemption may be taken prior to that time. And if you were to consider it for FY 2024, to consider it early, maybe as part of the budget planning process or sometime, and that will give the town time to prepare and, you know, get all the documentation that's needed for people who may or may not qualify.
Right, and I'm making no comment about whether we're going to pass it or not, but we certainly wouldn't burden the town and its employees with that kind of a burden in such a short notice. We would absolutely, I mean, I think I can speak for the select board that we would defer it for another year, because you couldn't possibly get it done, you know, for this year, but that's way in advance of next week. Alex, great job, excellent slides, really great summary in the package. I think, you know, I certainly have a better understanding of the factors involved and the nuances of the residential tax exemption. We did promise a deep dive. We've done that, and we'll do a deeper dive, I think, next week. If we could get, what really does pique my interest after this conversation this evening is to kind of nail down what, you know, net of the 500 trusts out of the 3,200, but net, you know, use 0 to 5 and 5 to $1 million, and what would it actually mean to the residents? Because I'm just looking to fire all the arrows in the quill to help young people in town and for have younger people and younger families stay in town. Now, whether this does it or not, anecdotally, folks say it doesn't, but it's another arrow in the quill, another tool in the toolbox that, as a responsible select board, we ought to be taking a look at, and that's what we're doing.
Yep.
So I think.
And I may add seniors on fixed incomes.
And seniors on fixed income as well. Okay, so that's what we're doing. Amidst all the noise, that's what we're trying to do as a select board.
Well, we'll see if we can get you that information.
Okay, good. Thank you, Alex. Great job. Thank you. Any other comments, select board? Are we good? We done? Okay. Next item on the agenda is our committee appointments. We have an appointment in the Energy Climate Action Committee. I will entertain a motion. We have one vacancy to June 30th, 2025 in the Energy and Climate Action Committee.
I can't find the piece of paper, but I know that it's Jerry Stahl, so I would move to appoint Jerry Stahl to the Energy and Climate Action Committee until June 30, 2025, unless sooner revoked or a successor is appointed.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments, questions? None. Mr. Metters?
Aye.
Mr. Shell?
Aye.
Ms. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. DeCastro?
Aye.
Chair says aye as well. Thank you. And last but not least, the town manager report and the monthly report for July 2022.
Great, thank
Ms.
you.
Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in tonight's packet, you have the town manager's report as well as the monthly report for July. So I just wanted to highlight a few things on the cover memo, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So I wanted to note employees' years of service. Dr. Bob Duncanson, who you've seen tonight, celebrating 35 years of service with the town of Chatham. And as you can see, there's a lot of longevity, especially in the 10 to 16-year range of employees. So our employees are listed there, as well as myself, at 11 years. And then we welcome new hires for August. We're very excited. So we had a promotion of Michelle Clark, who is our Community Development Office Manager. She's now transferred over to work with Terry in Facilities as the Principal Projects Administrator. So we're easing into that transition. She's there 1 day a week to help Terry in Facilities and then in projects as well as cemeteries, and then looking for her to be there full-time in the next couple of weeks. And we are advertising for her replacement as well. You saw Gloria McPherson tonight for the Housing Sustainability Director. Jeff Thibodeau you'll meet soon, and Christy Eldridge, who you haven't met yet. The memo will be going out tomorrow. She's our new Community Services COA receptionist. So with that, and also the Community Services Programs Coordinator set to begin in 2 weeks. They will be fully staffed over at the COA. So it's been a long time since, I think, before November as well. So we're really excited about that. And then we have recruitment opportunities. They're on the town's website. Police officer, heavy equipment operator in the highway division at DPW, laborer for parks and cemeteries, as well as the department assistant for our office for the select board and town manager. And then filling Michelle's position as the office manager for community development. And then last week, as you saw, Fire Chief Dave DePasquale has announced his retirement, 33 years with the town, 2 years most recently and currently as fire chief, and he's due to retire on November 30th. So more to come about promotional opportunities. I am looking to do an internal promotion to the fire chief. So that's something that we will report more on, as well as the promotions that it's created by the vacancy of the fire chief. And then, as you talked about tonight, the level 3 drought, critical drought designation by the state. You've vetted what we currently have as enhanced water restrictions that the board had voted on August 6th, and we'll come back with more information as we discussed tonight. The Chatham Fish Pier South Packing Bay, that was held by Martyr. Martyr had been a longtime tenant of the town and had fell into difficulties with staffing. We tried to work with them to make some type of arrangements, but in the end, they weren't able to meet the obligations of the lease agreement. So they are in the process of vacating the space, and then we put out a request for interest for a license person to operate it intermittently until we do the final RFP for services. The lease services usually run March 1st through February 28th. So we're looking to get someone interim and then hopefully have that next firm or person in the packing bay. And this provides for competition for the fishermen, and that was our goal, for them to be able to offload in a timely manner and then get as much competition for paying for the offloaded fish there. So there's information in here about that request. And really a fantastic grant award by the fire department. It's from the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters. It's a competitive grant program, and they were able to purchase and install 5 digital vehicle repeater systems. And this is something that's so important that we've included in the town manager's report about some of the gaps in coverage. And this will ensure that the full town communications will be enhanced and improved. And it also includes police in that communications network too. So we're really excited about that. And that was from Deputy Fire Chief Justin Tavano. He's the one who had been working hard to get the grant submitted and approved. I was at the One Cape Summit and was asked to accept the One Cape Award for Dr. Florence Selden. Her family wasn't able to make it. It was a real touching ceremony, and so I noted the link to the video presentation, and then I delivered the award to the Selden family, and Ira and their daughter Jada was really appreciative, and it was sorry that they couldn't make it. So that was a really touching event, and it's certainly recognized for her service to Cape Cod. And then her namesake for the Family Support Preschool Program, we're getting applications in, we're getting providers certified, so things are coming together. And that is for 3- and 4-year-olds as of August 31st of the school year, eligible for $5,000 and $10,000. And so that's something that's paid directly to the provider. So we're very excited about that. Shauna's worked with a translator from Monomoy Elementary School, so we'll have the program translated in Portuguese, Spanish, and I think that's it, Shauna? Yep. So trying to get the word out to as broad of a population as possible. And then how to subscribe to the weekly newsletter, information about the Notify Me, so that's our reverse 911 program. So we had a lot of people stop by for early voting this week. It's been kind of nice to see people come in, and just a lot of questions about how to remain and enhance our connection to our residents and how they can know more of what's going on. So that's something through the newsletter. And then very interesting information from all the departments. This is for July. We'll have the August report done in about 2 weeks and presented as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Super. Thank you, Jill. Thank you. Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I'm saddened with the retirement of Fire Chief Dave DePasquale. I've had the privilege of serving on this board with three very fine fire chiefs, Mike M. Briscoe, Peter Connick, and Dave. And he's going to be very much missed. He's a great contributor to the town, and I wish him well in his retirement. I wish he were hanging around a little longer, but I respect his personal choice. Thank you.
Yeah, and I absolutely echo those sentiments as well, Dean. Well-spoken, and he's been great. He's great to work with. He's clear and smart, but it's just he's retiring too early. But anyway, off he goes. But he's made the decision. I spoke to him. He called me. He made the decision, and he's committed. Anyway, thank you, Jill.
I think he's already being recruited for various town boards too,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm sure
he is.
I'm sure he'll
put the bum's rush
play
on
it back. Thank
All right,
you.
anything else, Jill?
No, I'm all set. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anything else from the board? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Metters.
Aye.
Mr. Shell.
Aye.
Ms. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. DeCastro.
Aye.
And the chair says aye as well. Good night, Chatham.